Carl Jung uncovered something that most psychologists would rather ignore. Narcissists don't gradually develop throughout childhood. They're born in a single moment, a specific instant, usually between the ages of 2 and 4, when something inside the child dies and something monstrous is born in its place. You've probably experienced this moment yourself. Maybe you don't consciously remember it, but your body remembers, your psyche remembers. It was the day you realized, with terrifying clarity, that being yourself was too dangerous, that your real feelings were unacceptable, that to survive in that family, you needed to kill who you were and become someone else. Jung called this the moment of fragmentation, the instant the true self is buried and a rigid mask. What he called the defensive persona takes its place. And that mask? It can become a narcissist. In this video, you'll understand exactly how this happens, what triggers this moment, why some children become narcissists and others don't, and most importantly, you'll recognize if this happened to you. Jung's theory on the formation of narcissism is radical because it goes against everything traditional psychology teaches. Freud and his followers believed that narcissism was the result of excessive love in childhood, of spoiled children who never learned boundaries. Jung completely disagreed. He saw, in decades of clinical work, that narcissists didn't come from overly affectionate families. They came from families where love was conditional, invisible, or non-existent, where the child needed to perform to receive scraps of affection, where genuine emotions were punished, ridiculed, or ignored. Jung observed that all children are born with what he called the true self, an authentic, vulnerable, sensitive essence. In the early years of life, this essence is completely exposed. The child cries when it feels pain, laughs when it feels joy, seeks comfort when it feels fear, expresses anger when it feels frustrated. It's pure emotional truth, without filters, without masks, without strategies. This is the self in its natural state, and in this state, the child is totally dependent on the emotional response of the parents. Jung called this mirroring. The child looks at the face of the mother, the father, and sees there a reflection of who they are. If the reflection is unconditional love, total acceptance, the child integrates a fundamental truth. I am lovable as I am. My feelings are valid. My existence has value. But what if the reflection is different? What if the child looks at the faces of the parents and sees indifference, irritation, rejection, or worse? What if they see a reflection that changes depending on what they do? A face that smiles when they are good, quiet, obedient, but that closes, moves away, becomes cold when they express needs, intense emotions, genuine vulnerability. This is where the fatal moment begins to form. The young child doesn't have the cognitive capacity to understand that the problem is with the parents, that they are the ones who have unhealed wounds, unintegrated shadows, an inability to love unconditionally. For the infantile psyche, there is only one possible conclusion. The problem is me. There's something fundamentally wrong with me. I am defective, dangerous, too much. And it's this devastating conclusion that prepares the ground for the moment of the death of the self. Let me tell you about Emily. She was 3.5 years old. One afternoon, she was playing in the living room when she knocked over a glass of juice. It wasn't intentional. It was an accident, like millions that children of that age have every day. But Emily's mother was having a difficult day. She was tired, stressed, dealing with her own unresolved issues. When she saw the juice spilled on the floor, something inside her exploded. She didn't just reprimand Emily, she attacked, shouting that Emily was careless, stupid, that she never did anything right. that she was tired of her. The mother's face contorted into an expression of pure rage, and then the final blow. Why can't you be normal like other children? Emily froze. It wasn't just the shouting that hit her. It was what she saw in her mother's eyes. Hatred. Complete rejection. In that instant, something broke inside her. It wasn't a conscious thought. It was a decision of the body, of the psyche, of the unconscious trying to protect her from an existential terror. My mother hates me. If I continue being me, I'm going to die. I need to become someone else. Jung would describe this moment as the traumatic separation between the true self and the persona. The true self, that authentic child who spilled juice and was frightened, was considered unacceptable, dangerous, causing rejection, so it was buried, repressed, pushed into what Jung called the personal shadow. And in its place, quickly, a new structure began to form, a defensive persona, a false self. In the following months, Emily changed. She became a perfectionist, hyper-vigilant, obsessively careful. She stopped crying when she got hurt. She stopped asking for comfort when she was scared. She developed a mask of competence, of not needing anything or anyone. And when she managed to do something perfectly, clean without spilling, tidy up her toys impeccably, she saw approval in her mother's face, and that approval became her psychological oxygen. She learned, I only exist when I'm perfect, when I hide my truth, when I become what they want. This is the birth of a narcissist. It's not a spoiled child who receives too much love. It's a terrified child who had to kill their soul to receive scraps of conditional love. And the tragedy, this child will spend the rest of their life seeking external validation, because internally, the true self is dead, buried under layers of defense, inaccessible. But wait, because not all children who go through such a moment become narcissists. Emily became one. But what about her sister, who witnessed the same scene, the same emotionally unstable mother? Why didn't she develop narcissism? Jung had an answer for this, and it's where his theory becomes even more fascinating. He spoke about what he called the archetypal constitution of the child. Basically, each child is born with a different sensitivity to the emotional world around them. Some children are naturally more resilient. They have a thicker psychological skin. They can go through moments of parental rejection and, although they are hurt, they don't fragment completely. Other children are what Jung called highly sensitive to parental archetypes. They absorb every emotional nuance. Each rejection penetrates deeper. And when the fatal moment happens, the fragmentation is total. Furthermore, Jung observed that the moment needs to have specific characteristics to create narcissism instead of other psychological defenses. First, there needs to be a perceived threat of emotional annihilation. Carl Jung understood that a child needs to feel, even if it's unconsciously, that their psychological survival is at risk, that if they continue to be authentic, they will be completely abandoned, rejected, left to die. Secondly, there needs to be an apparent solution. The child needs to perceive that there's a version of them that is acceptable. If I am this way, if I perform in this manner, if I become this, they will love me. This is the seed of the narcissistic persona, a mask that promises security through external approval. And third, and perhaps most importantly, the child needs to have initial success with this strategy. When Emily became a perfectionist, she actually received more approval from her mom. This reinforced the belief, my true self is unacceptable, but this mask works, this persona keeps me safe. And the more the persona is reinforced, the more the true self is repressed, until, eventually, the child completely forgets that there's something real beneath the mask. the persona becomes the total identity. And this person grows up believing, I am my achievements. I am the approval I receive. I am the image I project. Without these external things, I am nothing, literally, because the self that would give internal substance is dead, buried for decades. Jung saw this as a profound psychological tragedy because, for him, the purpose of human life was what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you really are, of integrating all parts of yourself, including the personal shadow, and living from the true self. But the narcissist did the exact opposite, killed the true self, and identified completely with a defensive persona. Individuation becomes impossible. The person is trapped in a perpetual cycle of seeking external validation because internally there's nothing, just a void where a living soul should be. Let me show you what this moment can look like in different contexts, because it's not always a shout, an obvious attack. Sometimes it's much more subtle and perhaps more devastating, precisely because it's invisible. I knew a man, let's call him Michael, who told me about his moment. He was 4 years old. He was a naturally joyful, expressive, creative child. One day, he was drawing, and he got so excited about what he created that he ran to show it to his dad. The dad was working, stressed, immersed in adult problems. When Michael arrived with the drawing, all excited, expecting pride, connection, recognition, the dad looked at it for 2 seconds and said, "That's nice. Now let me work, I'm busy." Might seem like nothing, right? A small interaction, but for Michael, at that moment, it was everything. He saw in his dad's eyes something worse than anger, total indifference, as if Michael didn't exist, as if his joy, his creativity, his need for connection was irrelevant, a nuisance. Michael didn't cry, didn't throw a tantrum. He just shut down, went back to his room, put away the crayons, and never drew in front of his dad again. But the death was deeper than that. He started to believe that his joy, his spontaneity, his intense emotions were problematic, that taking up space was wrong, that his emotional needs were a burden. In the following years, Michael transformed. He became the model son, quiet, independent, focused on tangible achievements. He studied obsessively, got perfect grades, won trophies in competitions, and finally, he saw pride in his dad's eyes, but only when he brought results, never when he just existed. Jung would say that Michael developed a narcissistic persona based on achievements. His sense of worth became completely dependent on external validation through success, and the joyful, creative child who just wanted connection died that day at 4 years old, was buried so deep that Michael's at 40 years old, in therapy, was crying because he couldn't feel genuine joy, couldn't relax, couldn't simply be without producing something. The false self had consumed everything. This is the moment. It can be a shout, it can be silence, it can be explicit rejection or subtle indifference. But there are always the same elements, a child showing their true self and receiving a clear message that this self is unacceptable. And there's always the same psychological response, fragmentation, repression of the self, birth of a defensive persona. A narcissist is being created now, something crucial that Jung emphasized and that most ignore. The parents who do this are rarely conscious monsters. They themselves went through the same process in their childhood. They carry their own unhealed wounds, their own unintegrated shadows. Emily's mum, who exploded because of the juice. She was probably a child who also learned that mistakes were unacceptable, that imperfection resulted in rejection. Michael's dad, who showed indifference, probably grew up in a family where emotions were ignored, where vulnerability was weakness, where love meant providing financially, not connecting emotionally. Jung saw this as psychological inheritance. Unresolved parental archetypes are passed down from generation to generation. Narcissistic parents create narcissistic children, not because they want to, but because they don't know how to do differently. They're operating from their own defensive personas, completely disconnected from their own true selves. How could they teach the child to live authentically if they themselves forgot how to do it decades ago? This doesn't excuse the behavior, but it explains the cycle, and understanding the cycle is the first step to breaking it. Because here's the most important part of all this. Even if you've been through this moment, even if you've developed a narcissistic persona, even if you've spent decades living from a false self, the true self is not dead. It's buried, repressed, hidden in the personal shadow. But it's alive. Jung believed that the true self is indestructible. It can be forgotten, denied, exiled, but it remains waiting. And with deep psychological work, it can be found again. The persona can be recognized for what it is, a survival mask, not your real identity. The personal shadow can be integrated. The true self can resurge, but only if you recognize that there was a moment, a death, a fragmentation. Only if you stop believing in the lie that the narcissistic persona sold you, that you are your achievements, your image, the approval of others. You're not. You never were. Underneath all those layers of defense, there's a real person, scared, hurt, but real. And that person, your true self, is who you always should have been allowed to be. Without a mask, without performance, without needing to earn love through perfection, just existing, just being. And if no one told you this when you were 3 years old, I'm telling you now, you have always been worthy of love, not for being perfect, productive, or impressive, but for existing, for being human, for feeling, for needing. Jung would spend his entire life trying to help people understand this, that the journey isn't about becoming more impressive. It's about becoming more real. It's about taking off the mask, however terrifying that may be, and discovering that underneath it is someone valuable, not despite their imperfections, but with them, complete precisely because they are human, flawed, vulnerable, authentic. If you understand the importance of this message, if you recognize how childhood wounds have shaped your life and want more people to understand this psychological truth that can liberate generations, the super thanks button below isn't just a financial support. It's you saying, this truth about narcissism and healing needs to be known. Each super thanks allows me to continue creating profound content about Jungian psychology, about childhood wounds, about how to break generational cycles of pain. You've just watched something that could change your understanding of who you are and why you became this way. When you click on that golden heart, you help other people gain access to this transformative understanding. You're not just a spectator. You're someone who survived a difficult childhood and is now seeking awareness and healing. Become part of those illuminating family shadows and breaking cycles of narcissism. Every contribution counts towards continuing this mission. So, let's talk about what happens after that fateful moment, because the story doesn't end when the child develops the narcissistic defensive persona. In fact, it's where a lifetime of psychological consequences begins, consequences that most people never connect back to that original moment. Jung observed that children who develop narcissistic defenses enter into what he called a Faustian pact with the psyche. They trade authenticity for perceived safety. The true self is sacrificed, but in return, the defensive persona promises, you will never feel that pain again. You will be safe. As long as you maintain the perfect mask, as long as you never show weakness, as long as you keep achieving, impressing, controlling how others see you, and for a while, especially in childhood and adolescence, this pact seems to work. The child with the narcissistic defensive persona often becomes the star of the family. The perfect son, the prodigious daughter, the one who always brings pride, gets the best grades, wins the competitions, impresses the adults. On the outside, everything looks amazing, but on the inside, a growing emptiness, a feeling of fraud, because on some unconscious level, the person knows, this isn't me, this is a performance. If they knew who I really am, they would reject me, as they rejected me when I was 3 years old. This is the curse of the narcissist. They seek validation constantly because they never believe in it. Each compliment slips through, doesn't penetrate. Each achievement feels empty soon after it's reached, because the validation is going to the defensive persona, not to the true self. And the defensive persona is just a mask. It cannot be nurtured. It cannot be satisfied. It's a bottomless pit trying to fill a void that was created decades ago when the true self was buried. Jung described this as living in identification with the defensive persona. The person forgets that they are more than the mask, believes that it's only that, and then any threat to the mask becomes an existential threat. This explains why narcissists react with such intensity to criticism, why they can't tolerate imperfection, why they have crises when they fail or are rejected. It's not arrogance, it's pure terror, because if the defensive persona falls, they believe there's nothing underneath, just the emptiness, just that rejected and terrified child that they buried so long ago. And the cruelest part? This fear becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The person lives in fear of real intimacy because intimacy would require showing vulnerability, imperfection, need, all the things that the true self felt, but that were deemed unacceptable. So they keep people at a distance, build relationships based on admiration, not on genuine connection, and then they feel profoundly alone, exactly what they feared. But it was the narcissistic defense itself that created this isolation. Jung saw this as the greatest tragedy of the human psyche. A child is wounded, develops a defense never to be hurt like that again, and that defense becomes a prison that ensures they will never receive what they most need, unconditional love for who they really are, because they never show what they really are. The mask protects, but also imprisons, and the more years pass, the more the defensive persona solidifies, the more the true self seems inaccessible, and the more difficult the journey back home becomes, back to oneself. But this journey is possible. Jung dedicated his life to mapping this path, and it always starts with the same step. Recognize the moment. Remember when you died, when you stopped being you, when the mask was born. Let me show you what this recognition looks like in practice. I met a woman, Emily, who at 38 years old finally remembered her moment. She had been in therapy for years, dealing with depression, destructive relationships, a constant feeling of emptiness. Nothing seemed to touch the root of the problem. Until one day, during a session, her therapist asked, "When was the last time you remember crying in front of your mother?" Emily froze, and then, like a wave, the memory returned. She was 5 years old. She had fallen on the playground and scraped her knee. She came home crying with blood running down her leg. Her mother looked irritated and said, "Stop the drama. It was nothing. You're always exaggerating everything. Go wash that knee and stop crying now." Emily remembered going to the bathroom, washing her knee in silence, looking in the mirror and seeing a pathetic, weak, dramatic child. And she decided, at that exact moment, never again. "I will never cry again. I will never show that I'm hurt. I will never need anyone." In the following years, Emily became the strong girl, the one who never complained, the one who could handle everything, the one who took care of others but never asked for help, and she received praise for it. Her mother said proudly, "Emily is so mature, so independent, never gives me trouble." But at 38, Emily was exhausted from being strong. She was in her third failed relationship because she couldn't be vulnerable, couldn't ask for support, panicked when someone tried to take care of her. And finally, she understood. That 5-year-old girl who decided never to cry again was controlling her entire life. The defensive persona of a strong and independent woman wasn't who she really was. It was an armor built on top of a bloody wound that had never healed. That realization, Jung would argue, is the beginning of what he called confronting the personal shadow. The personal shadow contains everything we've repressed. For Emily, it held all the vulnerability, all the need for support, all the unwept tears of 3 decades. And confronting the personal shadow isn't an intellectual process. It's visceral, painful. You need to feel everything you buried. Again, return to that moment and allow the wounded child to finally be seen, finally be consoled. Not by the mother who failed, but by you, by the adult you've become. Jung called this reparenting the true self. You become the parent you should have had. You look at that 5-year-old with the scraped knee and say what they needed to hear. That must have hurt so much. You have every right to cry. Come here, let me give you a hug. You don't need to be strong. You can be a child. You're safe with me. Sounds simple? It's devastatingly difficult. Because to do this, you need to admit that your parents failed you, that their love was conditional, that you had to become something you weren't to survive. And that admission feels like treason. It feels like destroying the illusion of a happy family that you built to protect yourself. But Jung would say the illusion is already destroying you. The truth may hurt, but it's the only thing that can set you free. And here's another layer that Jung explored deeply. Oftentimes, the fatal moment isn't about what the parents actively did, but what they didn't do. The narcissistic wound doesn't just come from obvious abuse, but from emotional neglect, from absence, from parents physically present, but emotionally absent. Think of a little kid learning about the world. They discover something fascinating, a butterfly, a shiny rock, and they run to show their mom, eyes shining with joy. That child isn't just showing an object. They're sharing an emotional experience. They're saying, "Mom, I'm feeling something wonderful, and I want you to feel it with me." This is a deep, archetypal need. Jung called it the need for effective mirroring. If the mom is present, if she looks in the child's eyes, smiles, gets excited too, says something like, "What a beautiful butterfly. You must be so happy you found it." The child receives a fundamental message. My feelings are valid. My joy is important. I deserve to be seen. I exist in a meaningful way in the world. But what if the mom is on her phone, glances quickly, gives an automatic smile, and goes back to her conversation, or is too tired to react, or says, "That's nice, honey, now go play"? To the child, this isn't interpreted as, "My mom's busy." It's interpreted as, "My joy doesn't matter. I don't matter." And if this happens repeatedly, day after day, the child stops sharing, stops seeking connection. And something inside them decides, feeling joy and wanting to share is too painful. I'm going to stop feeling so intensely. I'm going to disconnect. Jung saw this as one of the most common origins of narcissism. It's not dramatic abuse, it's chronic neglect, 1,000 little deaths instead of one big one. The child learns that their internal emotional life has no value, so they turn to the external, to achievements, to calling attention to themselves in other ways. If my feelings don't matter, maybe my grades matter. Maybe being the best at sports matters. Maybe being pretty, popular, successful matters. And so the narcissistic defensive persona is born, not from excessive love, but from chronic emotional hunger. And here's the part that Jung considered most tragic. When that child grows up and has their own children, they often repeat the pattern, because they've learned that emotions don't matter. That what matters are tangible results. So they do the same with their children. They buy things, but don't offer emotional presence. They take care of physical needs, but ignore the emotional ones. And the cycle continues. Generation after generation of people living through defensive personas, never accessing the true self, transmitting unhealed wounds to the next generation. Jung said that breaking this cycle requires what he called extreme psychological courage. It requires you to do what your parents couldn't do, confront your own personal shadow, recognize your wounds, do the work of individuation. It's not about blaming your parents. It's about taking responsibility for your own psyche. Did your parents hurt you? Yes. Did they fail you? Yes. But now you're an adult, and the only person who can heal that wound is you, hoping that they'll change, that they'll apologize, that they'll finally love you the right way, is waiting eternally. Jung called this remaining in the parental complex, stuck in a childlike dynamic where you still seek approval from figures who will never be able to give you what you need. Individuation requires you to become your own father, your own mother, that you learn to give yourself the unconditional love, the total acceptance that you should have received but didn't. And paradoxically, it's only when you stop seeking that externally that genuine relationships become possible, because now you don't need the other person to complete you, cure you, validate you. You're whole on your own. And from that wholeness, you can connect for real, not from narcissistic need, but from abundance, from true self to true self, from real person to real person, without masks, without defensive personas, just two human souls meeting in truth. And here's something that most people don't realize. The moment of fragmentation, as painful as it was, also contains the seed of healing. Jung believed that the psyche never creates a defense by accident. The narcissistic defensive persona was born to protect something precious, the true self, that vulnerable essence that was too sensitive, too open for that environment. The defensive persona buried the true self, but it also preserved it, kept it alive, hidden, waiting. So when you begin the work of taking off the mask, of dismantling the defensive persona, you're not destroying yourself. You're discovering a buried treasure, a diamond covered in decades of mud. And that diamond, your true self, may have been forgotten, but it was never destroyed. Jung would say that the true self is indestructible because it's archetypal. It's the essence of what it means to be human, vulnerable, imperfect, needy, but also courageous. Capable of love, capable of genuine connection, capable of real joy not performed. Returning to that true self requires that you traverse what Jung called the dark night of the soul, a period where the defensive persona is falling away. But the true self hasn't yet fully resurfaced. You're no longer who you were, but you're not yet who you can be. It's scary territory. Many people give up here. They return to the safety of the mask. Because at least the defensive persona is familiar, painful, but familiar. The unknown of becoming authentic is too terrifying. But for those who persist, for those who endure the dark night of the soul, Jung promised something extraordinary: rebirth, not a return to the wounded child, but an integration. You bring the vulnerability of the true self. But now, with the strength and wisdom of the adult you have become, you can be vulnerable and secure. Open and protected, authentic and resilient, this is complete individuation. It's not choosing between the true self and the defensive persona. It's integrating both, under the awareness of the mature ego. You know when to use a light social persona, but you never completely identify with it. You know who you are underneath, and that person is enough, because only when you recognize that there is a mask can you begin to consider the possibility that something real exists beneath it, something that has been waiting in silence for decades, to be seen again, to be accepted, to finally be loved as it always should have been, without conditions, without performance, just for existing. At what age did you stop being yourself to be loved? Many in the comments are realizing that they remember the exact moment, the day they learned that their feelings didn't matter. Share your age and what happened. Your story might help someone understand their own childhood wound. Maybe it will help someone somewhere finally feel seen and understood. It's a powerful thing to share your truth and to find that you're not alone. This is the beginning of healing, a step towards true integration. So let's start that conversation right here, right now.